The American air carrier known as Spirit Airlines, kind of the US equivalent to Ireland's Ryanair, they are shutting down permanently. Statement from Spirit Air: it is with great disappointment Spirit Airlines has started winding down its global operations effective immediately. All flights have been cancelled, customer service no longer available. While we are not able to help rebook your flight on another airline, well, of course they're not. You honestly think something like Spirit Airlines would help you with that, please? We will automatically process refunds for any flights purchased through Spirit with a credit or debit card to the original form of payment. We're proud of the impact of our ultra-low-cost model on the industry for the last 33 years, had hoped to serve our guests for many years to come. For more information on the wind-down process, visit spiritrestructuring.com. We've got a few things from legacy media outlets talking about this.
We begin with this morning's top story, the shuttering of one of America's low-cost airlines. Overnight, Spirit Airlines announced it was ceasing operations. This will be the first significant U.S. airline to stop operating in 25 years. The shutdown comes as rising jet fuel prices hampered the struggling airline emerging from its second bankruptcy. This means millions of passengers holding Spirit tickets will have to make new travel plans, and some 17,000 employees will be out of their jobs.
Yeah, imagine an airline just saying, yeah, all you lot that had tickets with us, I mean, yeah, we'll give you refunds, but other than that, get fucked.
Frank Oliver is here to break down what happened and what's next.
Adriana, good morning. The airline simply ran out of available cash to continue. The announcement hit their website at 2 a.m. Eastern. Spirit is calling it an orderly wind down of operations, canceling all flights and urging passengers with tickets today not to go to the airport.
Don't bother. Nobody's going to be able to help you.
Spirit Airlines already being felt by flyers this morning. Empty ticket counters at Spirit's check-in at LAX.
And not just LAX. I think a lot of the other major airports across America, O'Hare and Chicago, Dallas-Fort Worth International. I'm trying to remember if they've got something in New York, but yeah, it's just everything closed. Nobody there, nobody working, no lines. It just all evaporated.
You probably leave someone accessible. I mean, to at least tell me any update.
Bro's on hold. They're interviewing him and he's on hold. He's got him on speakerphone.
A $500 million lifeline from the Trump administration. Two of Spirit's three main groups of creditors were on board with the deal. Spirit's bondholders were not. President Trump said he would like to save the Spirit jobs.
Yeah, when you start entering into bankruptcy proceedings for or insolvency proceedings for a company, that's when the bondholders or the people who hold your debt, that's when they really start to have their say. And depending on how that debt is structured, some of them get to the front of the line and get paid first. Others have the unenviable position of being second, third, fourth, or even last in line. And that's where things like subordination and non-disturbance agreements come into effect, which is like a legal form of saying, we're not going to try and cut the queue and get up to the front of the line. We will wait in the queue in our place and not make a fuss about it.
But they have made a final offer.
USA first, America first, that's my budget, including with airlines. We're looking at Spirit. If we can help them, we will.
But that help never came, a last-minute bailout never materializing. The budget airline made travel more accessible when they started offering cheap tickets and charging fees for everything from printed boarding passes to seat selection in 1992.
It wasn't really cheap, though. I mean, when you compared everything that they nickeled and dimed you over, the cost difference was negligible between Spirit and, you know, something like Delta or United or American Airlines. So it was I don't really want to call it a shell game, but it was a lot of smoke and mirrors. To where it wasn't really as budget friendly as you think. And if we can just be really, really real for the moment, chat, Spirit Airlines kind of became the Carnival Cruise Line of the airline world. Just attracting some of the absolute worst sorts of customers that you don't really want on your airplanes, especially in a post 9/11 world with people who just don't know how to behave and sometimes even engaging in behavior that it can get you put on a no-fly list. At some point, as an airline, as a business, you have to ask yourself, do you really want those people as your customers? I know I certainly don't. I am a firm believer in the whole concept of the Pareto principle of 80% of revenue comes from 20% of your customers. That's usually your best ones, your loyal customers, your P1 demographics, as it were. But also, 80% of your headaches can come from another 20%. And there may be some overlap, but I generally speaking, there usually isn't. That's my thinking anyways. I would rather appeal to those 20% that are responsible for that 80% success. And the rest of it we'll do our best to cater to, but first and foremost, we're going to treat our best customers in the best way. And we're also going to try and cultivate a customer base that really just doesn't give us headaches, doesn't give us problems. Because it's hard enough to run a business in this world without having to deal with people who are absolute kettins and just completely uncultured slob tourists who think that somehow it's okay to throw a fit over not getting their way on an aeroplane, or masses of them stop in the middle of a common area and start doing some stupid fucking fan dance. I don't want those people as customers. I don't think those people have any place on a cruise ship or especially on an aeroplane. And so I think that was probably the Achilles heel of all of this with Spirit, is that they just attracted the worst kind of slob tourists. And kind of made everything worse. We don't want to have a customer base of Johnny Somalis. No, we really don't. That's a good way to put it. We don't want troublemakers. We want people who know how to behave themselves. And some of the responses by, for example, Carnival, to try and clamp down on that sort of bad behavior. Yeah, they were met with accusations of racism because most of the people behaving that way happen to be black. But you know what? Carnival made the right call and just said, yeah, don't care. We've got a cruise line to run, and we're not going to tolerate that sort of behavior. You lot are going to be the death of us if this keeps going on. Because it wasn't just fan dances; it was people engaging in just absolute brawls on board, and having the most boorish behavior, you know, bringing in the Bluetooth speaker boomboxes and playing this, you know, loud rap music and just all this garbage music that nobody really wanted to listen to, but it's just selfish behavior, not thinking of others, and the fact that you're on a cruise ship, you're having to share space with everybody else, and not everybody wants you polluting the common space and their own personal space with your shitty music. China bans people from traveling who can't behave themselves properly. I wish we did the same for our hooligans, because they really wreck our reputation in whatever country they travel to. Yeah, I mean, China kind of has to, because mainland Chinese tourists, I'm not talking about people in Hong Kong. People in Hong Kong, there's still a lot of the old world British colonial tradition, and so those people know how to behave themselves. But people from the mainland, yeah, they, especially once they started getting some money and going overseas, again, behaving in the most boorish fashion, the Chinese government finally had to step in and say, "Oi, you lot, stop it. Otherwise, you are not going to be allowed to travel." And even had to do classes and education campaigns with these people of, no, you're not allowed to smoke wherever you like. No, you can't just spit anywhere you want. No, this is disgusting behavior. And no, you can't just piss anywhere you like. You have to find a public loo to do that. And this is the proper way to use a toilet. You know, things like that, which for us, it's just, you teach children once and they know how to do this sort of thing. But we have to remember, even at one point, China was a developing country, and to this day, they still have outhouses as public restrooms. You know, the idea of sanitary indoor plumbing still escapes them in some parts. Saw a video from years ago about a black gentleman who went to China, had people literally walking up in him to try and wipe off the brown on him. Yeah. He was outnumbered, so, you know, that's one thing, but though that lot, they go over to another country and they try to do that, especially someplace like the United States or the UK, they're going to get stabbed or shot if they do that. It's just, for some people, civilized behavior can be taught and even comes naturally. For others, not so much. And it just, yeah. Spirit Airlines was attracting a lot of people that just did not know how to behave themselves.
I mean, I like Spirit. It's cheap, but I've traveled a lot for work.
Spirit had reached a deal with its lender that would have helped it emerge from its second bankruptcy by early summer. But after the war with Iran triggered a spike in jet fuel prices, that plan was derailed. Increased competition and the pandemic also took a toll on the struggling airline, leaving travelers this weekend in limbo.
I think that without Spirit or without like cheaper airlines, the price of other airlines is just going to shoot up. And I think that'll be a big problem.
Now with one...
I mean, for some people, you know, not just in the aviation business, but also ruling elites, that's kind of what they want. I think, especially in terms of people in power, in seats of government, they don't really want a lot of people traveling. They still have the mindset that that needs to be something reserved for the elites. And look, to a certain extent, I don't think we need to let everyone travel. There are some people, as I said, that have no business getting on an aeroplane. or a cruise ship, or even behind the wheel of a car. But they're doing it for all the wrong reasons of, whether it's bullshit environmentalism reasons, or just the fact that they don't want people to have freedom of movement. Because if they have freedom of movement, they might get organized. And if they get organized, they might end up throwing a lot of these people in power out of power and replacing them, and all of their plans for world domination will just go up in smoke. And so they don't want that. They just want people to live in the pod, eat the bugs, consume product, get excited for next product. And we see this with the types who were spearheading COVID lockdowns. That's the sort of thing that they want for all of us, for all time. They want us afraid and isolated, that way they can control us. And that part I'm very much against. I believe everybody should travel and see the world because, it enriches the spirit. You learn more things than you ever could in a classroom. It's very much like the Mark Twain quote that travel is fatal to prejudice and bigotry and other things, and broad, wholesome, charitable views of men and things cannot be fostered if one vegetates in one little corner of the world for their whole lives. But so many of the ruling elites, they don't want to deal with the rabble, and they also don't want people. They want people isolated and afraid. That way they can't organize, and they can't potentially overthrow them. I'll keep my hands off your waifus if you respectfully keep yours off mine, lol. Welcome in, Waka. Hope your weekend's been good so far. Yours as well. Nice you're holding hands with your waifus. We will get to that. I've got Neverness to Everness installed. We will get to that. We're starting from zero with that. This is what happens when you don't wear glasses. Yeah, wear your glasses. Wear your glasses, man.
Unless airline offering flights, passengers could see fewer choices and higher prices.
They're offering fares in a lot of cities, especially in Florida, for example, that are well below market price for some of the mainstream carriers like United or a Delta or an American. And so if you take Spirit out of the equation, then that's going to probably lead to higher prices in some of these routes.
Maybe in the short term. I think long term, if they start seeing less people flying, I mean, they're going to have to lower prices. But yeah, even some of the airlines, they're starting to move away from the multi-class model of aeroplane. I forget which one. There was one US-based carrier, I think, that was floating the idea of airplanes where the lowest tier of flying class was business class. I think it was even like an all business class flight. Tickets quite expensive. And I think it was something that they were toying with, the idea for international routes, which, it might make sense. Might make sense. Don't know if any of you have had to sit in economy on an international flight. I have. Does get a bit uncomfortable after a while. I'm all right with it to an extent with, say, a 6-hour hop from the US to, say, London or Europe. Where it really starts to grate on you is the 11, 12, 13, even 14-hour flights from the US to Japan to Shanghai to Korea. That's where, after a while, you're just like, get me off this tin can, please. I should, but I don't like the way they feel. I only wear them when I drive. It sounds like you just need to go back to the optometrist and get them adjusted, Whacker. If they're causing you, I mean, you do have to get used to them, but if they're causing you discomfort, go back to your optometrist or to your eye doctor and see if you can get them adjusted. They've got tools that can do that sort of thing. Don't try to do it yourself. You might actually break your frames. Don't know what they're made out of, but yeah. Sounds like just an adjustment's in order. Just give me smoking in aeroplanes and I'll run on the fucking hamster wheel that powers the TVs. Welcome in, Megalum. Yeah, that's another thing. There's a lot of airlines out there that are getting rid of the seat back television sets. And doing the whole bring your own device sort of thing, mainly because I think they want to charge you for high-speed internet, which is really not all that high speed.
Spirit will automatically issue refunds for any flights purchased through Spirit with a credit or debit card. Some airlines have implemented fare caps on tickets for Spirit routes where they offer nonstop service. But even with that help, airline experts say some Spirit passengers could wind up stranded. Kelly?
Oh, man, that's tough to hear, especially for folks who are probably excited about a vacation. Thank you so much, Meg.
Yeah. Let's see. Comments from Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy on this. Let's take a look at that.
Many of you have reported this morning at 3 a.m. Spirit Airlines ceased operations. So what that means is Spirit does not have airplanes in the air flying.
By the way, chat, if you're wondering why you're only getting that, those of you that are able to listen in stereo, your ears are not deceiving you. There's nothing wrong with your earbuds or your headphones or your computer speakers. We're only getting this audio out of the left channel, so just an FYI on that. Makes sense for me. It's really just need to get used to them. They're well fitted. Not even the most well fitted. Sometimes you have to go back and have them adjusted. I know that's the way for me. I wear glasses, so sometimes they don't always fit quite perfectly, or they feel like they fit perfectly, and then a day or two goes by and you notice these aren't really as comfortable as I thought they were, and so you just go back.
As of this morning, also their call centers are closed and they don't have staff at ticket counters. So if you have a flight scheduled with Spirit Airlines, don't show up at the airport. There will be no
Don't even bother calling because they're not going to answer.
What Spirit Airlines is now going to do is go through an orderly liquidation process. We'll see how that develops over the course.
There's historical precedence for this chart. We can get into that.
For customers of Spirit,
got a great example
too. On how you can navigate this situation that you now find yourself in. And President Trump, Administrator Bedford, and I have been working with the other airlines across the industry in anticipation that this morning may happen. And so if you're a customer, many of the airlines that are not Spirit are stepping up to provide you assistance. So United, Delta, JetBlue, and Southwest are capping their ticket prices for Spirit customers. It's going to vary between the airlines. You have to go to their websites to take advantage of these.
It's good Southwest is taking part in this. They are probably best alternative out there to Spirit. And, I mean, honestly, if you're going to go with a discount carrier, Southwest in the United States is probably the best one to go. They don't fly everywhere still, I don't think. But the routes have been steadily growing over time. Still a really good low-cost flyer. So, you're not entirely out of options in that. It's just given the choice between the two, I've always said, why let Spirit Airlines nickel and dime you on everything when there's just more straightforward pricing with Southwest? I don't know if I don't think they do the thing still where you can pick your seat. They might actually have moved over to assigned seating, like every other airline out there. But for a long time, and even to some extent even today, Southwest is still really good. If you need a quick hop from one major metro area to another in most of the United States. I don't think they fly everywhere, but they're good. And they're actually they're a decent quality airline. They have been for a long time.
Special offers. It is normally going to be about $200 for a one-way ticket. You'll minimally have to provide to the airlines that you're now going to book with your Spirit confirmation number and your proof of payment. I would recommend that if you have a ticket with Spirit, that you actually try to book with these airlines as soon as possible. These offers are not going to be open forever, and the airlines are going to have varying degrees of time frames at which you can take advantage of the opportunity. Again, go to the airlines' websites. For customers who are concerned about higher prices because of the announcement today from Spirit, American Airlines and Delta Airlines are offering across the board reduced fares on high-volume Spirit routes. Allegiant is
they know an opportunity when they see it. One of their competitors is no more, and those passengers have got to go somewhere. So they can afford to lower prices. They always have. You know, it was a few years back when fuel prices just spiked through the roof. And we saw that airline ticket prices were going up. Then fuel prices came back down again. We noticed that airline ticket prices weren't going down. You know, this was actually a subject of discussion when I was in business school working on my MBA. And I told him, it's like, well, look at it from their perspective. Why would they? Why would they lower the prices? I mean, they can. A lot of these airlines can afford to take a hit for a long time because they've factored in a lot of contingencies. But fuel prices go down. They're not in any rush to lower those prices. They're going to keep them as high as they can for as long as they can because that's just going to be pure profit for them. Or in some cases, you know, making up the difference lost when they had to scramble to raise prices because of rising fuel costs.
Up. They've also committed to freezing fare prices on routes that they have shared with Spirit Airlines.
For now.
And Frontier is offering a 50% off base fares across the network until May 10th. So again,
there's another one, Frontier Airlines. A lot of Spirit customers probably just going to move to Southwest, Frontier, those sorts of carriers, and they'll be fine. Overall, nothing of value was lost here. Is what it is.
This is the airline industry stepping up and trying to provide relief as Spirit is going to go through this liquidation. If you bought a ticket with Spirit Airlines, they have a reserve fund. You will be refunded to your original form of payment if you bought directly from Spirit.
Boy, that's gonna suck if that original form of payment is no longer active, like an expired card or something. That could suck.
If you purchased from a third-party vendor, say a travel agent, you're going to have to reach out to that travel agent and request that they secure a refund for you. The president specifically has been very concerned, as well as I and Administrator Bedford, about the employees of Spirit. And we're concerned.
They're not going to make it easy, the travel agents, because there goes their commission too, and they don't want to part with that.
Branded in certain destinations. So most U.S. carriers are extending travel pass benefits. So that's maybe a spare jump seat or spare seats for any Spirit employees who need to travel back to their homes. That's for pilots and flight attendants and other employees. They've also offered Spirit team members preferential employment interviews. So again, there's a demand for aviation workers. So even American and United have drafted or crafted microsites for Spirit employees to potentially jump the queue, and get preferential treatment in the application process for the many airlines that are now hiring, whether it's pilots, flight attendants, baggage workers,
they are experienced
or even
after all.
those who've worked in the call centers. You can go to the individual websites to see what's offered by each of the individual airlines. I'll take your questions in a second, but I think it's important to talk about why are we here today. There was
I think you just explained that, didn't you?
Between JetBlue and Spirit. And Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, along with the Biden DOJ, decided that they did not want that merger to take place. And at the time,
they did a lot of things in aviation that just kind of made no sense. I mean, a lot of people don't remember this. I think it was mentioned maybe once on Joe Rogan by someone that Biden administration basically said, yeah, the whole drone industry and all the advances that we've seen there with all of that, yeah, that's over with now. That's all over. We're not going to have that going any further beyond what it is now. This is just going to be hobbyist sort of thing where, yeah, potential industry in the making. Yeah, no, we're good. We're not having that. While you look in other parts of the world and drone tech and use for drones just exploding. But the Americans, they said no. They said no. We're not doing that. Anglo, welcome in. Good to see you.
The Biden and Buttigieg DOJ bragged and said, as they canceled the option for this merger, that this was a victory for U.S. travelers who deserve lower prices and better choices. Now, many at the time said this was a disaster. This merger should have been allowed. And this today would indicate this is not better for travelers. This is not better for pricing. This is not better for competition. Actually, it's worse.
They put up all that resistance, and then Spirit Airlines ends up failing anyway. And JetBlue, I mean, talk about being a shell of their former selves.
Airline go down because the markets were trying to allow two airlines to merge, make them stronger, and offer more competition for the American consumer. Also, Elizabeth Warren at the time cheered the blocking of the merger, saying that this was a Biden win for flyers. So again, I think it's important that we always look with a keen eye when airlines want to merge. We care about pricing for consumers. We care about competition. But if the markets are saying there needs to be a merger because there's health issues with one of the airlines or more than one airline, we have to take a look at it and make sure we make the right choices. And in this situation, history has judged the denial of the merger between JetBlue and Spirit through the Biden administration with, I think, a view that it was a massive mistake. So we have been engaged again with the airlines for the last several days as we saw the potential.
And you can bet in the so-called mainstream outlets, the legacy media outlets, people are going to grab on that and just some twaddled about how, oh, he shouldn't be politicizing this and making these political statements. They would do it if they were in this position. Once again, they'd do it to us, so do it to them first. And 1,000 times harder. Fuck them.
This wind down happening. And again, I want to thank the airlines in America for stepping up. The biggest airlines, the low-cost carriers, taking care of employees, taking care of customers, making sure that prices remain affordable, but also those travelers who could be stranded can actually get home. With that, happy to take any of your questions.
Not really interested in questions from the peanut gallery there. But we will give that a like. Oh, someone actually caught the radio traffic in the last few moments on Spirit Airlines.
Tower, hello, Fairwings 1833, visual 35 center.
Fairwings 1833, Detroit Tower, good morning, wind 2304, runway 35 center, clear to land.
Clear to land, 35 center.
That is from Dallas Fort Worth Airport.
Spirit wing 1607, turn west on Mike. Taxi via Mike. Echo Lima. Kilo to ramp. Cross, runway 35 left with me.
Mike, Echo Lima, Kilo to ramp, cross 35 left with you. Spirit 1607.
Good night. Fairwings 1833, Echo 1, then Echo Juliet, cross runway 35 left, taxi via Kilo to ramp with me. Good night.
Mike 1, Echo Juliet, cross 35 left. And then Echo, last part?
That's Kilo. Kilo to ramp with me after you cross 35 left.
Alright, Kilo to ramp with you after we cross 35 left. Fairwings 1833.
American 2592, wind 240 at 4. RNAV to Michelle, runway 35 center, clear for takeoff.
It's a bit nerdy, admittedly, chat, but it's historical. It's the last radio communications of an airline that is now defunct. So, bit historical in that regard. And, you know, you can oftentimes listen for yourself if you have the right sort of radio tuned to these sorts of bands. You can hear this aviation traffic, you know, chatter over the radio if you've got the right sort of device to listen to it. It's nothing really encrypted. I think Sea Crane Company in America still makes radios with that band.
Alright, RNAV to Michelle, 35 center, clear for takeoff, American 2592. Tower, Fairwings 1833.
Fairwings 1833, Tower.
Yeah, is there any other Spirit flights coming in after us?
Here we are.
Let me see. I don't see anything.
You're the last ones.
Unless there's... I don't think you guys flew nonstop from Intercontinental. That's like the last thing I'm kind of seeing on here. So you might be the last one.
They are.
Might be a repo flight, but yeah, I guess this is it. Probably the last revenue flight. This is it tonight.
Well, it was a pleasure working with you guys, and I wish you the best.
Same here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, Spirit, all the best, and whatever comes next for you guys. Really appreciate it, man. Thanks.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy stuff. They all know what's going on. Those Spirit Airline pilots. I mean, much as we shit on Spirit Airlines, you know, you can't deny the fact that it's like there's still people that are losing their jobs here, and that's in a rough economy like this. That is never a good thing. However, it does appear from what we saw with the Transportation Secretary's comments that other airlines are stepping up. It looks like, you know, they're taking applications. Presumably jobs are available for them. I mean, these are licensed pilots, many of them experienced. I find it difficult to believe that they won't bounce back fairly quickly somehow. Yeah, jobs of value were lost, yes, but the airline itself, nothing of value was lost. But still, you feel bad for the people working the flight crews, ground crews, everybody involved with that. But I should like to think that they'll be all right. There's still, especially pilots, flight attendants, the whole flight crew, highly skilled profession, still very much a need. Travel demand is not waning anytime soon. I suspect they will be all right. Yeah, it will be rough here in the interim, but this will sort itself out. That's what I believe, anyway.
And Spirit Wings 1, just want to say thoughts to all you and your colleagues over there at the Banana.
Chicago, here.
The next couple days unfold.
Man, we really appreciate that. Thank you. It's hard to believe this is it.
Yeah, no kidding. It's always a pleasure to talk with you guys on the radios. Yeah. Hope you guys make it out okay.
That's best.
Transient possible price spike. Competition will ensure for the market segment. Employees will be reallocated or change careers. Prices will level. Free market correction. Yeah, that's the general feeling. If it were the failure of a larger airline like American or Delta or United or Southwest, you know, we would be having a much different conversation. But this was one of the lower rung air carriers that there's already alternatives out there from Frontier to Southwest that people can choose from. But this will sort itself out. Yeah, TWA. Thankfully, you had American stepping in to fill that gap. And before that, you had the failure of one in particular I wanted to take a look at. Let's see if we can find anything here. Yeah, this is from here's a good one here, from the Collapse Archive. A lot of you may be too young to remember Pan American World Airways, or Pan Am. Fairly abrupt ceasing of operations with them in the early 90s. And this one actually sent some shockwaves through the business because it caught a lot of people completely off guard. So let's see, this from the... Let me go ahead and pause the music here for this one. This is from the Collapse Archive. From America's #1 airline to disappearance, the fall of Pan Am. A lot of people don't remember Pan Am basically ushered in the jet age. They were the ones who took a chance on Boeing's original jet aeroplane. You know, before that, it was just all propeller-based aircraft. They were one of the first people to adopt the Boeing jet, the 707, and they were the first to pioneer transatlantic and intercontinental air travel. Before they did it, nobody really had tried it before, mainly because the technology wasn't there. You know, even the idea of aeroplanes flying coast to coast in America from New York to LA was just a foreign, exotic concept. Or the idea of flying from New York's JFK to Heathrow in London. Pan Am was the one that pioneered all of that. Yeah, the old Pan Am flying boats, yes. Started out in life as a smaller regional-based airline in South Florida, and had a lot of airplanes that were designed to land on the water, doing quick jumps from Florida to Cuba and other parts of the Caribbean, and then grew into an international airline that opened up routes all over the world. They were the first to take a chance with the Boeing 707, the jumbo jet, the 747, and go to places almost because they were there, and really just introduce the whole concept of international travel. And they were fantastic, and they did it with such style and class that is very much a lost art in the world of travel these days. And and so to go from that to a decline in the 80s, especially after the Lockerbie bombing that resulted in a Pan Am aeroplane just exploding in the air. After that, it was just all downhill for them until one day, without warning, they ceased operations, and it caught the whole world off guard. Nobody saw that coming. First transatlantic flight routes were by Zeppelin airships from Europa to Latin and North America, and Africa to Latin America. Technically true, I suppose, Harold. I'm more talking about in terms of aeroplanes, and especially jet aeroplanes. So, transatlantic flight routes did exist, but Zeppelins, they're rather big and they're rather slow. This was the idea that you could do this and get there quickly, or a lot quicker than they had before. But anyways, let's check this out. This is from Collapse Archive. From America's #1 airline to disappearance, the fall of Pan Am.
Pan Am was dead.
Pan Am went out of business.
Pan Am has been in serious financial trouble for years.
On December 4th, 1991, the most famous airline in the world vanished. No crash, no scandal, no single catastrophic moment. It just stopped.
Yeah, it was a series of one unfortunate event after another piling up until they just disappeared. Oh, something else of note. Pan Am also sort of revolutionized travel in the sense that we have them to thank for the intercontinental hotel brand. Pan Am was running into the issue of how do our travel agents book a complete travel package for passengers, which includes a decent quality hotel that's up to passenger standards. Because some places they went that they were sending travelers to didn't really have much on offer, aside from, small inns or hostels or even just absolute flop houses. And so they said, why don't we build a network of hotels where our flights go? Thus, you got the Intercontinental Hotel brand and their network of hotels, which still exists as a luxury hotel chain that's part of IHG, the Intercontinental Hotel Group, which also includes famous brands like Holiday Inn.
The question is, why does that feel impossible? Because here is what makes this story genuinely strange. Pan Am was not some obscure regional carrier that quietly folded when the numbers stopped working. This was the airline that invented international air travel as we know it. The airline that built airports from scratch on uninhabited Pacific islands just to establish a route. The airline that ordered the Boeing 747 before the plane even existed, that effectively forced Boeing to build the most iconic aircraft in history.
They were also supposed to be one of the early investors in the Concorde. And prototypes, I think, had been created that would have allowed them to start flying routes from, say, New York to London, New York to Paris, sharing those routes with British Air and with Air France. But ultimately, the fuel crisis and everything else going on led to Pan Am cancelling that investment in Concorde.
Pan Am was not killed by bad pilots or terrible service or a single reckless gamble. It was killed by something far more interesting, and by the time this is over, you'll see it hiding in every business story you've ever heard. But we need to go back to the beginning, because to understand how something this great disappeared...
Yeah, they originally flying boats, and so many of the planes in Pan Am's fleet always started with the name the Clipper, and many of them named after famous nautical vessels.
You have to understand just how great it really was. Here's what the history books leave out. Pan Am was not born from ambition. It was born from fear. In 1927, the same year Lindbergh crossed the Atlantic alone, a group of U.S. Army officers quietly filed paperwork for a new airline. Not because they believed in the romance of flight, because a German-backed Colombian carrier was creeping dangerously close to the Panama Canal Zone. Washington needed an American counterweight. Pan Am was, at its birth,
war was brewing, and the United States feared the encroachment by the Germans.
Foreign policy instrument dressed up as an airline. What nobody could have predicted was the man who would take that instrument and turn it into a legend. His name was Juan Terry Tripp. He was 28 years old, and he had the absolute unshakable certainty of a man who had never genuinely been told no.
Juan Tripp was an absolute powerhouse. He very much fit the profile of the sort of great men of history, the people that drive history forward. So much of Pan Am's success is owed to him, his vision, and just his incredibly ambitious drive to make it such a powerful player in commercial air travel. And when he died, you could say that a lot of Pan Am died with him. This randomly reminded me of TWA Flight 800. Must be the soft narration with the topic of aviation. Yeah. much like with Lockerbie and the Pan Am flight that was that met a tragic end there, TWA, they were never the same after Flight 800. Still a lot of conspiracy theories around that one. But, yeah, TWA also headed up by one of the great men of history in the aviation world, Howard Hughes. In fact, for quite some time, those were the two leading brands in commercial aviation. It was a battle between Pan Am and TWA, Trans World Airlines. A lot of the big name brands in American aviation were just sort of also rans or smaller tier type carriers. They, for a long time, they could not hold a candle to TWA and Pan Am.
Trippi didn't see aviation as a business. He saw it as a conquest, the conquest of distance itself. Every ocean, every continent, every unreachable corner of the globe was, in his mind, a problem waiting to be solved by one of his airplanes. When people told him something was impossible, he hired Lindbergh, the most famous man on Earth, to scout the routes anyway. When countries didn't want to give him landing rights, he charmed, pressured, and outmaneuvered their governments until they did. Pan Am's very first revenue flight in October 1927 was a mail run from Key West to Havana. 90 miles, 1 hour, 10 minutes.
Not even passengers. It was not a passenger flight. It was a cargo flight, hauling the mail, hauling the post for the Americans.
Nothing spectacular, except it was the first step of everything. Within months, Pan Am was carrying passengers. Within years, it was operating across Latin America. Within a decade, it had crossed the Pacific. It was operating across...
I like that. The Clipper Jupiter Rex. Not sure why that speaks to me so, but there it is.
Latin America. Within a decade, it had crossed the Pacific. In November 1935, a flying boat called the China Clipper lifted off from California and crossed the Pacific Ocean, stopping at Midway, Wake Island, Guam, and reached Manila 5 days later. Pan Am hadn't waited for the infrastructure to exist. It had built the infrastructure. Hotels on uninhabited atolls, radio stations on tiny Pacific islands, airports carved out of nothing. The Atlantic followed in 1939. Then World War II came, and Pan Am became the unofficial Air Force.
They did everything with style and class back then too. I mean, look at this. These were the stewardesses, the flight attendants of Pan Am. Back when they had actual, like, aesthetics and beauty requirements that, yes, you had to be young, female, and you had to look good. You couldn't be fat. You had to, have a healthy or skinny body shape. You had to be able to fit into a pencil skirt. And, yeah, you had a proper uniform. You had a special bag that you carried essential travel goods, spare uniform. But, yeah, you had tailored uniform, pillbox hat, white gloves. And at the very least, kitten heels that you had to wear. These days, I think you might see something similar with Aeroflot in Russia, Italia Airways. And it was quite a glamorous lifestyle. They got paid decent money, and these ladies got to travel the world do shopping in places like London and Milan. They lived quite a lifestyle. And then eventually it was expected that once they hit a certain age, I think in their 30s, that they were done. They had their fun. Time to go off and get married. And especially if you got married, that was the end of you as a stewardess. And then feminism, women's lib, civil rights, and everything else happened, and the glamour died as a result. Airplanes had become safe enough you didn't need to be a nurse prior. Yeah, that's the original position of the stewardess, was as an in-flight nurse. So a lot of them were registered nurses. It used to be a prestigious job. It did. I too remember the conspiracies about Flight 800. After all, the first people to report it exploding mid-air was a helicopter from the 160th Aviation Regiment, reporting missile smoke at the explosion. Yes, I've heard those as well. May very well be something to that. Some sort of government cover-up of some kind.
Of the United States, flying 90 million miles for the government, building 50 airports in 15 countries, training thousands of military pilots. By 1945, Pan Am operated in 62 countries and employed 19,000 people. It wasn't just America's airline, it was America's reach into the world. If you want to understand what the world lost when Pan Am died, you need to feel what it was like to fly it. Because flying Pan Am in the 1950s and 60s was unlike anything that exists today.
There was a reason that for a long time, I think in the 70s and in the 80s, their advert slogan was, Pan Am, you can't beat the experience. And it was a really good experience. Even into the 70s and the 80s, it was still a good experience. But especially with the dawn of the jet age, there was a lot of glamour to it. It was a very special event. And it was something that, yes, you got dressed up in your Sunday best for it.
The meals were prepared by trained chefs and served on actual china with real silverware.
This photo that we're seeing here, chart, this is some sort of recreation of the Pan Am dining experience. This is a set that they've created somewhere in the greater Los Angeles area. And yeah, these are waitresses / actresses that they have hired to be your flight crew. These are period accurate. I think these might even be actual uniforms that were used in the 70s. This is more 70s era. I know the hats are authentic. It's quite an expensive event-style dining. You have to have specialty tickets for it. But yeah, you can get an approximation of what it was like to travel on Pan Am in the 60s and 70s at wherever it is, somewhere in Southern California.
The cabins were spacious. Flight attendants, selected with the rigor of a military academy, trained in multiple languages, moved through the cabin with a composed, almost theatrical elegance. Celebrities flew Pan.
This is a still photograph from the short-lived Pan Am television series, first run on the ABC television network in America. It was a charming show. Sad that it only got 13 episodes, but yes, it was also the big breakout role for actress Margot Robbie, and her career has been on the upswing ever since.
Am. Heads of state flew Pan Am. When a young New Yorker wanted to impress a date with the idea that the world was his to command, he bought a Pan Am ticket. The innovation was relentless. Pan Am and IBM built one of the world's first computerized reservation systems.
Those reservation systems, in these primitive forms that we see here, much of that infrastructure still exists and is still running today. I kid you not, some of their systems are still using punch cards and tapes running computer programs because they can't switch any of that off. The whole thing would fall apart. It's just been a slow building little bit on top of each other as far as systems go over the decades. And it would just be catastrophic if they were to try and move completely away from analog to purely digital.
Pan Am created the modern economy class, the Rainbow Service, making transatlantic travel affordable for ordinary Americans for the first time. Its Worldport terminal at JFK Airport looked like something from a science fiction film.
Beautiful.
And then, in October 1958, something happened that changed everything again. A Pan Am Boeing 707 lifted off from New York's Idlewild Airport and landed in Paris. The jet age. Flight time cut in half. Other airlines scrambled to order jets of their own. Pan Am, as always, had already moved. But the boldest move was still to come. In 1966, Tripp walked into Boeing and asked for a plane twice the size of anything that existed. Boeing's engineers said it was barely possible. Tripp told them to build it anyway.
The Clipper One Tripp.
The result was the Boeing 747. Pan Am ordered 25 of them before the design was finalized. When the first 747 entered commercial service in January 1970 on Pan Am's New York to London route, it was another pivot in aviation history. Nearly 400 passengers in a single aircraft.
The only thing that was its Achilles heel was fuel economy. These days they build commercial jets to be as aerodynamic and fuel efficient as possible. This one, like the narrator is saying, really stretched the limits of what they could do at the time, and they still hadn't quite figured out fuel efficiency yet.
Decks. The distinctive hump, magnificent. The 747 was Pan Am's greatest triumph, and, as it turned out, one of the seeds of its destruction. Juan Tripp retired in 1968. He left behind the most famous airline in the world. He also left behind problems he may not have fully seen coming. Here's the thing about building an empire entirely on prestige. Prestige is the most fragile thing in the world.
It fades
Pan
quickly.
Am was about to discover just how quickly it can shatter. Pan Am had one structural weakness, and for 40 years, nobody cared because the airline's prestige was so overwhelming it made the weakness invisible.
Eventually, that sheen starts to fade. And you kind of have to keep coming up with new things to make it gleam and sparkle once more.
Until it didn't. The weakness was this. Pan Am had no domestic routes. Think about what that actually means. Delta, American, United, they could fill their
That is a weak
planes with
spot.
domestic passengers flying from Chicago to Dallas and connect those passengers to their international flights. They had a massive internal feeding network. Pan Am had nothing.
Yeah, why would you settle for all domestic flights when you yourself have the capability to provide international flights? And in some cases, even direct flights. You're not going to hand off domestic travelers to go international on your competitors. You're going to try and develop your own international routes yourself. Because Pan Am already proved that it can be done. And it's sort of like with the original 4-minute mile. It was believed to be impossible. And then somebody made it possible. They ran a 4-minute mile. And then after that, more people started running a 4-minute mile. and going even faster and faster. So, good news, Pan Am proved it can be done. Bad news, their competitors saw it could be done, and they wanted to do the same thing.
Of the sort. Every passenger who wanted to fly Pan Am to Paris first had to get themselves to New York or Miami on their own. The airline was entirely dependent on international demand. And international demand, as the 1970s would prove, can evaporate with terrifying speed. In 1973, the Arab oil embargo didn't just raise fuel prices. For Pan Am, it was like discovering that the ground you'd been standing on was made of paper. The Organization of Arab Petroleum Exporting Countries cut oil supplies to the United States in retaliation for its support of Israel during the Yom Kippur War. Fuel prices exploded, and Pan Am had just taken delivery of a massive fleet of fuel-hungry Boeing 747s, the very planes that were supposed to be its greatest triumph. The timing could not have been worse. Air travel demand collapsed. Losses appeared that Pan Am had never seen before. The airline sold its Pan Am building in New York, a 40-floor midtown skyscraper that...
Yeah, this was... Before it was the MetLife building, it was the Pan Am building originally. This was their headquarters. I think they even offered... you see this helicopter landing, it did have a heliport. I think at one point they were offering either commercial or chartered helicopter rides from their headquarters in New York to JFK, just so people didn't have to fight traffic getting over to the airport.
Literally had its name on it. It sold its intercontinental hotel chain. The great empire began liquidating its own identity to survive. Then came the airline deregulation.
You saw that with a lot of big companies that own real estate, especially in America in the 1980s onwards. They needed capital freed up, but they also still needed to have a place where all of their employees could show up for work. And so a lot of these companies would do, I think one term for it was leaseback deals, where they would sell their real estate, could be a skyscraper in a downtown area. They would sell that to, some other company that specializes in commercial real estate, and then set up a long-term lease that would allow them to stay in that building. So they no longer own the office tower, but they're still allowed to stay there because they've gone from owner and landlord to tenant.
Act of 1978. Overnight, the regulatory structure that had protected Pan Am's pricing and route dominance for decades was dismantled. New, lean, low-cost carriers entered the market. Existing airlines slashed prices. The rules by which Pan Am had built its monopoly no longer applied. Pan Am's response was to buy National Airlines in 1979 for $437 million, an attempt to finally build that missing domestic network. The merger was messy, expensive, and culturally disastrous.
Yeah. A lot of mergers and acquisitions. People don't really like to talk about it, chat. A lot of M&A deals, generally speaking, they don't work out. They just don't. And a lot of it has to do with corporate culture. You've got two disparate corporate entities with people who like to do things a certain way. Now, if those ways are similar to one another, you might be able to make it work. But if entity number one has one way of doing things and entity number two is another way of doing things, they're going to clash. Eventually, one of them has to win out, but the bitterness and resentment built up, especially amongst the workforce, it's going to weigh down on the organization. And there's also going to be people that just in those organizations that they do not like change, and they're going to fight you every step of the way. Even if they appear to be going along with it, they're still going to fight you. In some, small, petty, passive-aggressive ways. Integrating operations is really, really hard. A lot harder than people think. You can't just crack the whip or bring the hammer down and say you will do this or you're fired. It's not that simple. It never is.
Instead of solving the structural problem, it deepened the financial wound. By the end of the 1970s, Pan Am was a company on the defensive. They were still flying, still prestigious, still recognizable. A version of Pan Am existed that could have survived if it had been given time. It wasn't given time. Every great company in decline has a moment where the losses shift from financial to spiritual, when the assets being sold aren't just assets anymore. For Pan Am, that moment came in 1985. In 1985, Pan Am sold its entire Pacific Ocean route network, the routes it had pioneered in 1935, the routes where the China Clipper had made history, to United Airlines for $750 million. The Pacific had been Pan Am's soul. It was the great adventure. Selling it felt like selling a chapter of the airline's identity. The money helped, briefly, but the structural problems remained.
They're just, at that point, they're just cannibalizing themselves. And they just handed, it just looks like such an unforced error that they handed an easy win to a competitor.
Management churned. New executives arrived with turnaround promises and left when the promises didn't hold. Routes were cut. Aircraft were sold. Pan Am acquired a shuttle service between Boston, New York, and Washington, a cosmetic fix on a structural wound. The workforce lived under perpetual anxiety. Thousands of people who had given their careers to Pan Am, some for decades, watched the airline they loved shrinking month by month, route by route, aircraft by aircraft. The famous Pan Am spirit was difficult to sustain when the next round of layoffs might include your entire division. Here is the almost unbearable
Rounds of layoffs. Why does that sound so familiar, Chart? Why does that sound so familiar?
irony. Pan Am's most profitable quarter in its entire history was the third quarter of 1988. The airline was finally showing real signs of recovery. Something was working. And then came December. It was 4 days before Christmas. Most of the passengers on Pan Am Flight 103 were going home. Among the 259 people who boarded at London Heathrow that evening were 35 students from Syracuse University, young men and women returning from a semester studying in Europe, their bags stuffed with gifts, their heads full of experiences they hadn't finished processing yet. They were the kind of people you might have sat next to on a flight, the kind of people who were excited. The plane, a Boeing 747 named the Clipper Maid of the Seas, took off at 6:25 in the evening and climbed northward over England towards Scotland. At 7,000 Surrey p.m. Greenwich Mean Time, at 31,000 feet, a bomb hidden inside a Samsonite suitcase in the forward cargo hold, concealed within a Toshiba radio cassette player packed with the plastic explosive Semtex triggered by a timer, detonated. The aircraft broke apart almost instantaneously. 259 people fell from the sky over the quiet Scottish town of Lockerbie. The fuel-laden wings plunged into a residential street called Sherwood Crescent, creating an explosion that residents described as resembling a miniature atomic bomb. 11 people on the ground were killed instantly. 270 people died in total from 21 countries. What happened in the weeks that followed says something about human beings that is worth stopping for. The people of Lockerbie opened their homes to investigators. They washed and pressed the clothing recovered from the fields. They stood vigil. Their compassion was extraordinary. The investigation that followed was the largest criminal inquiry Scotland had ever seen. 15,000 people interviewed, 180,000 pieces of evidence examined. It eventually pointed to Libyan intelligence agents, acting on orders believed to come from Muammar Gaddafi himself, likely in retaliation for a 1986 American bombing campaign against Tripoli. For Pan Am, the immediate consequences were catastrophic. Passengers who had been loyal...
Yeah, and to add insult to injury, later on, the Lockerbie bomber would be released from prison, claiming that he was in poor health or something like that. And then, oh no. Turns out he was faking it. They just wanted to get out of prison early. Most European airlines the last 20 years. Yeah, well, most major companies the last 20 years. It seems like the only way they've been able to survive is through rounds of layoffs. I know it was like that for the companies that I used to work for back in my radio days. It would be rounds of layoffs, followed by furloughs. A few years would go by. Some more companies would merge together. Then it'd be a round of layoffs. Then more furloughs. Just never-ending cycle. Never really growing. Revolving door of management that would come in with their own grand designs. Never really able to deliver. Mainly because nobody believes it, nobody buys it anymore. And it's all managed decline. Most large companies here in Scandinavia just do mergers and cut off whatever part of the companies couldn't be afforded or wasn't needed after the merger. Yeah.
For decades simply stopped flying it. Bookings collapsed. The FAA fined Pan Am for 19 specific security failings. Lawsuits from victims' families sought hundreds of millions in compensation. The perception, whether fair or not, that Pan Am was unsafe had been established. And that...
Yeah. They didn't screen the luggage. They didn't screen the passengers. They let passengers from North African and Middle Eastern countries known for terrorism on their airplanes. And so you had this problem. Most of what we have in terms of airline and airport security is really just theater. We saw that with the investigative pieces against the TSA by Politico. Because nobody has the balls to just admit profiling works, and we just need to do profiling of everyone, but especially people from places where we know they just love to do a terrorism.
Perception, once established in aviation, is almost impossible to remove. Pan Am had finally been recovering. Its best quarter ever, 3 months before. And a single bomb in the suitcase erased all of it. Not just the profits.
That's all it takes.
The possibility. Pan Am...
If people don't believe that it's safe to fly on your airline, they're not gonna fly. And it wasn't just Pan Am. The idea of, modern aviation safety, as we know it now, there was still a lot of... They didn't really get a handle on all of that, I think, until the 90s. It was still a struggle even into the 80s to really get that right. It was still believed largely that there were dangers with flying, even though for the longest time it was, statistically speaking, the safest way to travel.
Am did not give up. That much should be said clearly. They tried everything. New management launched programs to refurbish aircraft and improve on-time performance. In 1989, Pan Am pursued a $2.7 billion merger with Northwest Airlines, a deal that would have finally given the airline the domestic network it had always lacked. The merger was backed by major financial institutions. It was credible. It could have worked. But a billionaire named Al Chechi outbid Pan Am for Northwest directors. The deal collapsed. Then, in August 1990, Iraq invaded Kuwait. Fuel prices surged. Global air travel demand contracted sharply. Pan Am's prime transatlantic routes, the last profitable core of the airline, went into steep losses. There was no margin left to absorb another shock. There had never been a margin. That was always the problem. In January 1991, Pan Am filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It continued operating while seeking a restructuring path. But operating under bankruptcy while the Gulf War raged and passenger confidence remained shattered, the path narrowed to almost nothing. Delta Airlines purchased Pan Am's transatlantic routes.
There was a period in the 70s and 80s where runway heists were a thing in Denmark, other parts of Scandinavia. Basically, people would drive vehicles into the airfield, force the airplane to stop, then board it with guns and take personal valuables and pick through the luggage whilst holding the plane hostage, then fleeing in the vehicles afterwards. Yes, not just Scandinavia, but it was almost a worldwide phenomenon. And you certainly saw depictions of it in films, television. Usually involved a standoff with police if it took them too long, because most airports here didn't have their own security. Yeah. Security is still, for the most part, left up to the airlines and the airports. It's still, I mean, at least in America it is, it's still somewhat decentralized, but you do have the TSA kind of covering it all. But as we've seen, it's just security theater. It's not real. They've had so many near misses and so many things that managed to squeak through that should not have squeaked through, that it's honestly a miracle we haven't had something like Pan Am 103 or a TWA Flight 800 or even a 9/11 style event again over the skies.
The New York to Europe network, the Frankfurt hub, the gates at JFK, the spine of the airline. What remained was a skeleton. On December 4, 1991, Pan American World Airways ceased operations entirely. The last flights landed. The last Vicers disembarked. Employees who had devoted their careers to this airline, pilots in their white caps, mechanics, flight attendants, reservation agents, engineers, gathered in airports and break rooms and wept. Some stood outside the terminal at JFK and watched the planes go dark, unable to leave. 64 years. Gone. Remember the question we started with? Why does Pan Am's disappearance feel impossible? Here is the answer, and it has nothing to do with airlines. Pan Am wasn't killed by bad management alone. It wasn't killed by terrorism alone, or oil prices alone, or deregulation alone. It was killed by the combination of all of those things, applied one by one to a company that had one fatal design flaw baked in from the very beginning. It was built entirely on international demand, with nothing to fall back on when that demand disappeared. The 747 order, which looked like visionary boldness, became a debt burden when the oil crisis hit. The National Airlines acquisition.
That's what a lot of autopsies of Pan Am don't really talk about. I'm glad that they brought this up. Yeah, that lack of a domestic network proved to be a fatal weakness.
Meant to solve the domestic problem, drained resources at the worst possible moment. The Pacific route sale extended the airline's life, but removed its geographic resilience. Every decision, reasonable in isolation, made the next crisis slightly more lethal. That is not bad luck.
No long-term
That is
thinking.
a pattern. And that pattern exists in every great institution that has ever collapsed. Here's what's worth sitting with. Pan Am.
It's very much like the attitude now of so many corporations focusing on quarterly profits, making sure that every 3 months it always looks like big line is going up, and little or no regard for the future. It's an attitude that, as we've seen, spans the decades, not confined to Pan Am, but honestly has become endemic with a lot of companies in the world economy, especially in corporate America. It's a problem, and there's going to be a price to pay for all of that eventually. How they've managed to hang on as long as they have it just astounds me.
And pioneered air traffic control, international weather forecasting for flights, computerized reservations, economy class, the jumbo jet era. It didn't just connect cities. For 40 years, it connected a world that desperately needed connecting. And it did it with a style and a confidence that the industry has never fully recovered. The employees who built it, the pilots, the flight attendants, the mechanics, the reservations agents, gave their careers, in many cases their entire working lives, to this airline. They believed in it. That belief wasn't naive. The thing they believed in was real. The brand was purchased in 1998 and has been revived in fragments at various points over the decades.
No, these days it exists more as a fashion brand than anything else. It survives off of licensing with travel accessories. I mean, at one point they had Pan Am branded luggage. Actually, I think I still have like an overnight or a carry-on bag from them. But yeah, there's been talk over the years of reviving Pan Am as a sort of regional carrier once again, going back to their origins. But there's so much red tape these days that it is nigh on impossible to start a new airline brand. Or just, a new airline, full stop.
None of those attempts came close to recapturing the original. You can't revive a feeling by reattaching a logo. Nearly 35 years after its final flight, people still pause when they see that blue globe. They still feel something, recognition or nostalgia, or a kind of loss they can't entirely explain. That reaction isn't about planes. It's about what the planes represented.
The world you live in no longer exists. Isn't that the meme? The one with the little child in the foreground, and in the background, the Twin Towers of the old World Trade Center in New York. I think there was even, in the background, a jumbo jet taking off. The meme is real, chat.
The belief that distance between people was just a problem waiting to be solved. Pan Am solved that problem for 64 years. And when it disappeared, quietly, without a crash, without a headline worthy of the scale of the loss, it left behind a shape. A very large shape. The shape of something the world once believed was permanent. If this story stayed with you, like and subscribe this video. It tells the algorithm this story deserves a wider audience. The more people see it, the more stories like this we can make.
Good stuff, lessons from history.